The drawer handle was still cold in my hand when I found the papers proving my husband had another family. As my breath steadied, the metal pressed harder into my palm, forcing me not to look away. While that cold crept up my arm, every lie he'd wrapped our marriage in began to unravel. The same sharp chill reminded me how often he told me to trust him while keeping me in the dark. That's when I realized our relationship wasn't breaking, it had been broken long before tonight. Still holding that cold handle, I chose the one vow he never expected: I'd save myself. Before we start, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. If you enjoy the story, please hit like, subscribe, and join our community. It really helps us grow. His fingers wrapped around my wrist before I even registered the movement, warm, tight, almost trembling. I froze with my hand halfway to the drawer handle. He leaned in, breath minty from the gum he always chewed on Sundays, and whispered, "Don't open that drawer, Nora." The smile he forced right after didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes, they flickered with something sharp and afraid, like I'd stepped onto a landmine he'd buried. The sunlight coming through the living room windows made everything look too peaceful for how suddenly my heart kicked up. Dust floated lazily in the air, the scent of new paint still lingering in the corners, and a half-packed box of old clothes sat open on the rug beside me. I'd only been looking for tape, just tape, nothing dramatic, nothing worth that grip. "I didn't know it was off limits," I said, trying to laugh. My voice wobbled. "I hated that." "It's not," he replied too quickly. Then, like he remembered his role, he softened his tone. "It's just boring client stuff. You don't need to mess with my work junk." He gave my wrist a little pat before letting go, like I was a kid reaching for a hot stove. I tried to smile back, but the air felt thick between us. His desk sat tucked into the corner by the window, his creative sanctuary, as he always called it, with dramatic emphasis, like he was protecting sacred relics instead of a laptop and a few folders. I never questioned it, never even looked too closely at it. Marriage, I thought, meant respecting each other's space. But now I noticed the small things: how he stepped slightly in front of the drawer, blocking it with his hip, how he kept touching the edge of the desk, fingers tapping nervously, how he watched me the way someone watches a loose thread, worried it'll unravel something big. "I just needed tape," I reminded him, my cheeks burning because suddenly it sounded like an excuse. He let out a laugh, loud and fake, a half second too late. "Right, right, of course, babe, relax, you can grab whatever you want, just not the drawer stuff." His smile stretched tight. "Trust me, you'd be bored out of your mind." "I can handle boring," I said, trying to brush off whatever weirdness this was. That was the wrong answer. He sighed dramatically, leaned his head back like he was exhausted by me. "Nora, why do you always have to turn everything into a drama? It's just a drawer, let it go." His voice had that condescending softness he used whenever he wanted me to back down without making him look like the bad guy. Something in my stomach dipped. I hated that I instantly wondered if I was overreacting, if maybe I did push too hard, if maybe I should have just kept looking for tape somewhere else. He was good at making me feel like the smaller one in every disagreement, like I was the emotional one, the irrational one. I muttered okay, because arguing would have only made the moment uglier. He kissed my forehead like he was rewarding obedience, then walked off to the kitchen, humming carelessly as he opened the fridge. But I wasn't humming, my hand was still tingling where he'd squeezed it. That night, while I brushed my teeth, the hallway light off and only the bathroom mirror glowing with a soft yellow haze, I heard it. A faint metal click, then the whisper of a drawer sliding open, slow, careful, then closing again. I held my toothbrush midair and listened, foam settling bitter on my tongue, my heartbeat tapping against my ribs. He thought I wouldn't hear it over the running faucet, but I did. And something about the quietness of it, the way he tried to hide the sound, hit me harder than the wrist grab. I stared at myself in the mirror, toothpaste smudged on my lip, hair messy from the long day, and I felt this cold clarity settle into my chest. Whatever was in that drawer wasn't boring client stuff, and whatever scared him enough to warn me off, it wasn't small. I rinsed the sink, turned off the light, and whispered into the dark hallway, to myself more than to him. "One day I'm going to open that drawer, and when I do, I won't be the one who's afraid." His hand came down on the desk with a crack so sharp it made my shoulders jump. The pen beside the envelope rolled across the polished surface and clattered to the floor. "How many times do I have to say it?" He snapped, leaning over the desk like he owned not just the furniture but the air around it. "Don't touch my things." I was still half bent forward, fingers inches from the envelope, my breath stuck somewhere between my throat and my chest. The slap of his palm echoed in my ears longer than it should have. It was just a piece of mail, an unremarkable white envelope with a company logo in the corner, but you would have thought I'd tried to set fire to his computer. "I was just moving it out of the way," I murmured, straightening, brushing imaginary dust off my sweater because it gave my hands something to do. The apartment was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fridge and the faint buzz of traffic outside, quiet in a way that made his anger feel even louder. "A boundary is a boundary," he said, scooping the envelope up and tucking it under a stack of folders. He didn't look at me when he said it. He rarely did when the conversation wasn't flattering to him. Over the past week, the apartment had settled into a rhythm, a layout of invisible borders I kept accidentally crossing. My work laptop lived on the dining table, next to my planner and a mug that always smelled faintly like peppermint tea. His things colonized the corner by the window. A thick mahogany desk he insisted on buying for the aesthetic, a glossy Mac with two monitors angled like a command center, stacks of notebooks with embossed covers, a special lamp he claimed helped his creative flow. He liked that phrase, creative flow. He repeated it like it was a sacred practice. He never called my work anything sacred. He called it spreadsheet land, rolling his eyes dramatically every time I opened Excel or double-checked a financial report. My agency is the real engine of our future, he'd say, tapping his chest with a low chuckle as if numbers and stability were some silly hobby I happened to enjoy. But it was my salary that covered most of the rent, my predictable paycheck that kept our bills from bouncing when his creative flow hit slow months. Still, whenever I gently suggested we maybe create a budget or at least discuss savings goals, he'd groan loud enough for neighbors to hear. And worse, he performed it. At a dinner with friends over wine glasses and the clink of plates, he announced, "Nora doesn't know how to live a little. She's married to Excel. Honestly, I'm surprised she has room in her heart for me." Everyone laughed. I swallowed my embarrassment with a sip of water so cold it made my teeth ache. I smiled because that's what you do in those moments. You minimize your own discomfort to avoid looking uptight. But inside, something small cracked. That crack widened every time I passed his desk and saw something new. Another expensive gadget, a sleek stylus still in packaging, a subscription invoice sticking out from under a folder with numbers that didn't match any conversation we'd had. When I'd ask, gently, carefully, he'd wave a hand without looking up. "It's business, Nora, not your hobby." The word hobby always stung. Like my actual, real, financially stable job was a pastime I played at, while his volatile dreams were somehow the foundation of our lives. One night while he was in the shower, steam drifting under the bathroom door, the scent of his eucalyptus body wash filling the hallway, I walked past the desk and paused. I don't know what pulled me toward the drawer. Curiosity, defiance, fear maybe, dressed up as logic. I tested the handle. It didn't move. Locked firmly. I leaned closer, pretending to pick up a paperclip from the rug in case he stepped out suddenly. And that's when I saw it, a tiny bright scratch around the keyhole. Fresh, clean, like it had been installed recently. My stomach tightened, not with guilt but with recognition. Locks weren't for client stuff, locks were for secrets. When I finally crawled into bed that night, the sheets felt too cold and too stiff. My pulse thudded in my ears like someone knocking from inside my own body. Lucas climbed in beside me minutes later, the mattress dipping under his weight, smelling like soap and steam. He didn't notice how quiet I was, he almost never did. Staring at the ceiling, the faint glow of city lights brushing the room in soft blue, I let myself face a truth I'd been pushing away. I lived in this home, but I didn't belong in all of it. And if he was going to make me feel like a stranger here, then I needed to start watching him the way strangers do, carefully, silently, and with my eyes open. Rain was tapping against the window like impatient fingers when I pushed open our front door, shaking water from my hair and kicking off my shoes in the narrow entryway. The apartment was warm, dim, quiet, the kind of gray evening where everything felt a little heavier, a little slower. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by habit, their clatter echoing in the silence, and that's when I saw it. An envelope, thick, official-looking, lying just inside the door on the hardwood. I bent down, still balancing on one foot as I pulled off my other shoe, and read the name printed neatly across the front. Allison Grant Hale. I blinked. Grant Hale, Hale, Lucas's last name, our address under it. Same apartment number, same street. For a few seconds I just stood there, rainwater dripping from my sleeves, the envelope cold and slick against my fingers. My brain scrambled through possibilities, none of them making sense. A cousin, a distant relative, someone with a hyphen by coincidence. Before I could even turn the envelope over, Lucas appeared in the hallway, towel slung around his neck, his gym shirt damp with sweat. He moved fast, too fast, and snatched the envelope from my hand so quickly he bent the corner. "Mail mix-up, babe, chill," he said with a laugh that came out sharp and jittery. I didn't say anything, I replied. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. The rain outside suddenly seemed louder. He waved the bent envelope in the air like it was an annoying piece of junk. Probably some old tenant or wrong floor, happens all the time. I stared at him, but the name. He cut me off. "Nora, don't do that thing where you look for patterns in everything." He smirked, but his eyes weren't playful, they were warning me. "You're reading into it, again." Again, that word always hit like a slap, like he had a running list of my faults, too dramatic, too sensitive, too curious. "I wasn't reading into anything," I said softly, but he was already walking away, envelope tucked under his arm. Later, after dinner, I watched from the hallway as he tossed the mail. He didn't put the envelope on top like something meant for return. He shoved it deep, way down under pizza coupons and grocery store circulars, hiding it. My stomach had that same uneasy dip it had when he locked the drawer. He didn't see me watching. Hours later, we were sitting on the couch with a blanket over our legs, the glow from the TV painting blue shadows across the room. A sitcom laugh track filled the background. Lucas stretched an arm behind me like everything was normal. Then his phone buzzed. He'd left it face up beside the remote, and the screen lit up bright enough to reflect in the TV screen. You made it home yet? Just that simple, intimate, expectant. I didn't even have time to process it before he flipped the phone over so fast, it slipped out of his hand and dropped between the couch cushions with a muffled thud. I reached instinctively to grab it. Here. Don't touch it, he snapped. The words were sharp enough to freeze me mid-motion. He forced a laugh half a beat later. Relax, screen cracked, it's glitching, just leave it. But his knee was bouncing, his jaw tight, he wasn't watching the TV at all. I leaned back slowly, feeling the distance between us grow even though our shoulders still touched. I didn't say another word, didn't ask what A stood for, didn't mention the envelope again. But when I went to bed that night, the sheets felt cold even with his body next to mine. I stared at the ceiling while he scrolled his phone turned completely away from me, the soft clicks of the screen like tiny whispers I wasn't meant to hear. There was a life running next to mine, a parallel track I hadn't noticed before, and I realized with a hollow twist in my chest that I needed to start paying attention to every little thing he tried to hide. Tonight was the envelope. Next time, I promised myself I'd be ready to look deeper. He was out cold on the couch, one arm flung over his head, his mouth slightly open as he snored softly, those little stuttering exhales he always denied making. The TV flickered blue shadows over his face, making him look younger, almost harmless. A half-finished glass of wine sat on the coffee table beside mine. The apartment felt hushed in that late Friday way, like the whole week had finally exhaled. And his laptop, his precious, guarded laptop, was open on his stomach. For a moment, I just stared at it. I told myself I was only going to close it, maybe plug it in so it wouldn't die overnight. But a deeper part of me, the part that had been tightening for weeks, whispered, "Look, stop feeling crazy, find the truth." I eased the laptop off his stomach, my fingers brushing the warm aluminum. He didn't stir. A calendar filled the screen, clean white boxes, little color-coded bars. I wasn't looking for anything, not really, but a few labels jumped out immediately. Client check-in AG. Every Tuesday and Thursday. Max school. Every weekday at 3:30. I frowned, leaning closer. He never mentioned a client with those initials. And school, we didn't have kids. We'd talked about it in vague someday terms, usually with him saying things like, let's wait until the agency hits its stride, or you're too stressed right now anyway. My pulse thudded in my ears. I clicked one of the Max school entries, the details open D and a neat little pop-up. Pick up Max 3:30. Address Elmwood Elementary, West Side. I whispered what into the still air like the word might make the entry explain itself. A child, a schedule, a routine, and none of it included me. Before I could click anything else, his phone buzzed on the couch cushion beside him. The vibration jolted the laptop slightly in my hands. I froze, staring at the screen that lit up with a preview. It was a picture. A little boy, maybe 5, wearing a bright green dinosaur t-shirt, grinning wide enough to show the gap where a baby tooth had fallen out. He had dark hair, messy and cowlicked, eyes the same warm hazel as Lucas's. Below the photo, he asked where you were. My breath hitched, it felt like someone had pushed a fist into my stomach. My fingers slipped on the trackpad. Lucas jerked awake. His hand shot out, slamming the laptop shut so hard the hinge made a cracking sound. What the hell, Nora? His voice was rough, panicked. He sat up, eyes narrowed like I'd committed some betrayal instead of just looking. I wasn't snooping, I said, even though part of me hated how quickly I tried to defend myself. Your laptop was open, and the calendar, Lucas, who is Max, and who? Oh my God, he groaned, dragging both hands down his face. You're doing it again, making everything about you. I'm not, my voice shook. I thought maybe you were keeping something from me, something important. He scoffed, it's a client's kid. A client, do you understand that concept? People hire creative directors, Nora, and sometimes they need favors, you always assume the worst. A client's kid, but the address was a school, a schedule, a pattern, and the text he asked where you were. The lies stacked themselves like a crooked tower. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered. Because you blow everything out of proportion. He snapped the laptop charger out of the wall and stood, pacing toward his office. Seriously, you need to work on this paranoia, it's exhausting. He shut himself inside the office with the door half closed, the way he always did when he wanted me to feel like I was the one retreating. A moment later, I heard it, the soft, deliberate click of that drawer lock again. The sound threaded into the quiet apartment like a warning. I sat alone on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, its reflection showing my face in distorted flickers. The wine tasted sour now. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. There was a whole life connected to his phone, his laptop, his drawer, a life that had routines and names and faces, a life I wasn't part of, a life he didn't want me to see. Later in bed, I lay stiff under the covers, the ceiling above me washed in faint streetlight. Lucas never came to join me. I didn't text him. I didn't knock on the office door. Instead, I let a cold thought settle into place. If I wanted real answers, I needed someone who understood paper trails, signatures, contracts, loopholes. Someone who wouldn't tell me I was imagining things. I needed my Aunt Denise. The night I finally opened that drawer, my hand shook so violently the key nearly slipped through my fingers and clattered onto the floor. For a moment, I stood there in the half-dark of our living room, breathing too fast, my heartbeat pounding against my ribs like it wanted out. The apartment felt heavier than usual, thick with the kind of silence that presses on your skin. Even the steady hum of the fridge sounded sharp, like it was cutting through the quiet. Lucas was gone off to the office for an emergency pitch, a phrase he tossed around so often it had lost all meaning. He'd left in a hurry, grabbing his jacket, shouting something about client timelines, barely brushing a kiss near my cheek before the door slammed behind him. He didn't know the key to his drawer was sitting in the junk drawer, buried beneath rubber bands and old batteries. He didn't know I'd spent the past hour walking circles around his desk, like I was orbiting a truth I wasn't ready to look at directly. But now I was done pretending my gut didn't know something was wrong. I walked to the kitchen, pulled open the junk drawer, and sifted through the mess until my fingers brushed cool metal. The key was tiny, almost delicate, strangely innocent for something that could blow my life apart. I returned to the desk and locked the front door behind me. I didn't want noise, interruptions, or witnesses, just the truth, whatever it was. Kneeling at the drawer, I slid the key into the lock. My hand trembled again, a traitor against my will. The moment the lock clicked open, a shock ran through me, like my body knew before my mind did that nothing would be the same after this. I pulled the drawer open. Inside, everything was arranged with an unsettling level of precision, labeled folders in neat stacks, a bundle of photos wrapped in a stretched-out rubber band, a worn manila envelope with our address typed across the front. And writ. N in Lucas's handwriting in thick black marker, one name, Allison. My throat tightened. I picked up the envelope and set it aside gently, afraid the paper might burn me. Then I opened the first folder with legal scrawled on the tab. The first page stopped my breath entirely. A marriage certificate. State of groom Lucas Jonathan Hale. Bride Allison Marie Grant. Dated 3 years before he ever met me. I blinked hard twice because my vision suddenly smeared. I turned the page, searching for something, anything to show this had ended. A divorce decree, a separation filing, an annulment. Nothing. Just the certificate, and underneath it, joint tax returns, his signature beside hers, financial documents that tied them together in ways he never tied himself to me. Then a lease agreement for an apartment across town, 2 names, 2 signatures, a move-in date that overlapped with our first anniversary. My breath came shallow, quick, almost painful. Then the medical bills, pediatric, insurance statements, one detail hit me like a punch. Dependent Max Hale. A child, his child. My fingers curled involuntarily around the page, creasing it. Max, the same name I'd seen on his laptop calendar, the same name I'd tried to rationalize away. I set the bills down and reached for the stack of photos. The rubber band snapped as I pulled it off, stinging my wrist. I flinched, but not nearly as much as I did when I saw the first picture. Lucas at a park, lying on a picnic blanket, laughing. A small boy in a red hoodie running toward him. A woman beside them, dark hair pulled back, soft smile. Allison, she looked like she belonged next to him, like she'd been there a long time. Next photo, Christmas morning. Lucas holding Max, lifting him toward a tree topper, their matching eyes, wrapping paper everywhere, a mug of coffee on a table behind them. Domestic, intimate, familiar. Next, a birthday party, blue frosting smeared across Max's cheeks. Allison leaning in, Lucas's arms around both of them. He looked the way he looked in the photos with me, like he belonged, like he loved them, like he'd never left. I swallowed hard, forcing the photos down onto the desk before my shaking hands tore one. Beneath the photos was another folder, corporate. I opened it with dread, barely breathing. Inside were contracts, tax filings, business documents, and one form that made my blood run cold. A draft separation agreement, my name printed at the top, a legal redistribution of shares in Hale and Nova, my shares being transferred quietly back to Lucas, in exchange for a payout so insultingly low it might as well have been a tip. He'd planned this, planned to cut me out, planned to erase me from the company I funded. He'd written a legal exit strategy for me while staying legally married to someone else. The worst part, it wasn't even signed. He hadn't needed to, not yet. The room swayed. I sank to the floor, papers slipping from my lap, my knees hitting the wood with a dull thud. A sob tore out of me, raw and ugly, filling the quiet that had haunted the apartment all night. I wasn't his only wife. Legally, I might not have been his wife at all. And my inheritance, my mother's legacy, had been fed directly into a business he always intended to take away from me. No wonder he guarded this drawer like it held his beating heart. Because it did, and now it was in my hands. I wiped my face with trembling fingers, forced myself upright, gathered every document in a neat pile, and began photographing them one by one. Every page, every signature, every lie. Click, click, click. Each shutter sound felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. When I finished, I saved everything to a secure folder and attached the files to an email addressed to one person. Aunt Denise. In the body, I typed only 3 words. I opened the drawer, and then I hit send. I heard his key in the lock before I saw him, fast, frantic metal scraping against metal like he couldn't get inside quickly enough. I stayed at the kitchen table, hands folded over the folder I'd left open in plain sight. The apartment was dark except for the overhead light humming above me, casting everything in a harsh yellow that made the cold takeout on the counter look even sadder, untouched. When Lucas stepped into the living room and saw the desk drawer hanging open, the color drained from his face so quickly I actually thought he might pass out. His mouth opened, then closed. His eyes flicked to me, then back to the drawer, then to the folder under my hands. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, so suddenly it felt rehearsed, he plastered on a smile. Wow, he said lightly, shrugging out of his jacket. Digging up old ghosts, huh? Old ghosts? Like the marriage certificate dated years before he claimed he'd met me was just a dusty scrapbook. Like the smiling little boy who looked exactly like him was a harmless memory. Like the legal contract quietly stripping my ownership of his company was no more than a miss. Laced receipt. I didn't say anything, I just watched him. He walked toward the kitchen slowly, eyes darting to my phone on the table, to the folder, to the drawer again. He gave a laugh that sounded too loud in the stillness. Okay, okay, he said, tossing his keys down. So you poked around, happy now, got it out of your system. His voice was light, but his fingers were tapping the counter, restless and sharp. His eyes kept cutting toward the documents like he was trying to figure out which one I'd seen first. I swallowed. Why didn't you tell me you're still legally married to Allison? The tapping stopped, he froze. For a second, less than a breath, shame flickered across his face. Real, raw, unmasked. Then he smothered it. I'm not married, he said, waving a hand. We're basically separated, the divorce is in process. I didn't want to complicate things when you and I started dating. I wanted a clean slate, you deserved that. A clean slate, I repeated. Is that what you call hiding a whole family? He winced but kept the performance going. Look, I was going to tell you, after it was finalized, I didn't want you to judge me. You're sensitive about trust stuff and I didn't want to scare you off. My jaw clenched. Sensitive about trust stuff because you keep giving me reasons to be. He rolled his eyes dramatically, like I'd asked him why the sky was blue. See, this is exactly why I kept it quiet. And Max, I asked, you didn't think I deserved to know you have a son? His gaze hardened. He wasn't part of the plan. Allison and I were already done when look, it's complicated, Nora. No, I said quietly, it's actually really simple. He huffed, annoyed. Fine, be dramatic, but families don't disappear overnight. I'm trying to handle this responsibly, and instead of supporting me, you're snooping through my private things. I didn't rise, I didn't yell. I just reached into the folder and slid out the draft agreement, my name on the front, my shares quietly transferring to him for an insulting payout. And this, I asked, this is responsible. He blinked, thrown off for a second, then the irritation snapped back. You misunderstood that completely. That was just a hypothetical. Ethan pushed for it for the company's protection, in case of emergencies. Emergencies like getting rid of your wife. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. Oh my God, he groaned. You're twisting everything, you always do this. You take a tiny thing and build a whole conspiracy. If you really loved me, you would have come to me instead of violating my privacy. You lied to me about an entire marriage, I said, and a child, and a contract to take my ownership from me. He stepped closer, shaking his head like I was the one unraveling. Nora, stop, just stop before you make this worse. You need to calm down and we'll figure this out privately. Quietly, you don't need to involve anyone else. My hands were trembling, but my voice came out steadier than I felt. I already sent everything to my aunt. He froze again. My lawyer aunt, I clarified. His jaw clenched hard, a muscle ticked at the side of his face. You what? I sent her everything, so whatever happens next, I lifted my chin, won't be quiet. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time, not as the woman he thought he could manipulate, but as someone who might actually challenge him. You're overreacting, he muttered finally, voice low with threat, and you're going to regret making this public. I stood. Lucas, I said softly, your regret stopped being my problem the second I opened that drawer. I thought she would scream at me, or slam the door, or accuse me of stealing her husband. All the scenarios I'd rehearsed on the drive over involved anger, hers, mine, maybe both of us crying in the hallway. But when the door opened and I saw her, holding a sleepy little boy with Lucas's exact eyes, the first thing she said was, he did it again, didn't he? Not a question, really, more like a truth she'd already accepted. The hallway smelled like laundry detergent and cinnamon, something warm baking in another apartment. The building was older, quieter. My hands were freezing inside my gloves as I clutched my phone and the printed documents, the edges crumpled from how tightly I'd been holding them. Allison stepped aside to let me in. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not freshly crying but worn-down crying, the kind that dries in streaks over days, not hours. Max tucked himself behind her leg, his little dinosaur toy pressed to his cheek. He looked at me the way children look at unfamiliar adults, curious, cautious, waiting for someone to tell them whether to be afraid. Come in, she said softly. You look like you're about to pass out. Her voice wasn't angry, it was tired, deeply tired. Her apartment was modest, hand-me-down furniture, mismatched mugs on the counter, a small kitchen table with a coloring book open on it. It felt lived in. Real, nothing like the curated aesthetic Lucas insisted on in our place. She guided me to the table and motioned for me to sit. Max shuffled to the living room, curling up on the couch with a blanket and a cartoon murmuring from the TV. When I slid the stack of documents toward her, my fingertips trembled. I thought you deserved to see this. She took a long breath, then opened the first page. Her face didn't twist or contort the way I expected. Instead, she went still, so still I could hear the fridge hum, the cartoon voices, even the faint sound of rain tapping the balcony railing. She flipped to the next page, then the next. Marriage certificate, tax returns, lace, medical bills, draft agreement targeting me. Her jaw clenched. So he married you, she said quietly, without divorcing me. Her voice cracked, but she didn't break. She looked at the dates, the signatures, her signature trying to fit the puzzle pieces together in a way that didn't hurt. It didn't work. I thought the separation was finalized, she whispered. He told me he said it just needed some processing time. She let out a bitter laugh. Everything with him needs processing time. She got up, disappeared into her bedroom, and returned with a thin folder of her own emails, screenshots, printed messages. She set them between us. You should see the stories he told me, she said. The first email I read made my stomach turn. I'm sleeping at the office tonight, investor meetings early morning. Another big campaign coming together, cash flow tight, but things are about to turn around. And a photo Lucas at a restaurant he'd told me was a guys-only networking dinner. Only now I saw the date stamp, our anniversary. He'd spent it with her and lied to both of us in the same breath. Allison sipped from a chipped mug and rubbed her forehead. He's been late on child support for months, says the agency is struggling, says he's doing everything he can. She shook her head, her voice faint with resignation. I thought I was the reason he was stressed. I thought maybe I was asking too much. Hearing her say that made something hot rise in my chest. Recognition, anger, solidarity. I swallowed. I invested in the agency, I told her softly. A lot, my inheritance. My aunt helped me structure the paperwork, so I own more than half technically. Allison blinked. You what? And he's been drafting documents to take those shares back, I added, pulling out the agreement. He planned to shove me out. Her expression changed instantly. Gone was the weary politeness. In its place was something sharp, bright, cold. He did the same thing to me, she said. Not with shares, but with promises, with half-truths, with excuses, always planning an escape route for himself. We sat in silence for a moment, hearing Max giggle softly at his cartoon from the next room. It was such a small sound for something so grounding, so human. Allison reached for a second mug, filled it with coffee, and slid it toward me. The steam brushed my face, warm against the cold knot inside my chest. We're not doing this separately, she said finally. We're not giving him two different stories to spin. I nodded. We collect everything. Your timelines, my documents, receipts, messages, every lie, every overlap. And when we confront him, she added, we choose a place where he can't talk over us or twist it. My hands wrapped around the mug, holding the heat like it was the first warmth I'd felt in days. For the first time since opening that drawer, I didn't feel alone. Aunt Denise's office always smelled faintly like citrus cleaner and old paper, comforting in a way, but intimidating too, with its dark wood paneling and perfectly aligned binders stretching across the shelves. I sat across from her conference table chair, bracing myself for a lecture, for the sentence I'd been dreading since the drawer opened. Nora, you made a terrible mistake. But when she closed the door, sat down, and slid a thick file toward me, her expression wasn't pity or disappointment. It was certainty. He's been underestimating you from day one, she said. For a moment, I just stared at her. The fluorescent light above us buzzed softly, and my hands, resting in my lap, felt suddenly too warm in my sleeves. Underestimating me, I echoed, my voice hoarse. She opened the file and turned it toward me. Let's walk through your original investment. My stomach twisted. My mom's life insurance payout, her last gift to me, the thing I'd guarded so carefully, was the money Lucas had convinced me to put into his agency 2 years ago. I remembered writing the check, excited to be supporting his dreams, feeling proud to be the kind of wife who believed in her husband. Aunt Denise had handled the paperwork back then. I barely skimmed it. I had trusted her, and I had trusted him even more. Now she tapped a specific page with her manicured nail. See this? Your funds didn't go in as a donation or a loan. They went in as capital contribution through a holding company I set up under your name. I blinked. Okay, but what does that mean? It means, she said, leaning back, you own 55% of Hale and Nova. The words hit like cold water, shocking and disorienting. What? I whispered. She nodded calmly. You are the majority shareholder legally, financially, and operationally if you choose to be. I felt the room tilt slightly. My humiliation, still raw from seeing the documents in Lucas's drawer, cracked open into something else, something steadier. My fingertips brushed the edge of the folder, the paper textured and real beneath them. But he's been acting like. I stopped, unable to even finish the sentence. Yes, she said, like you're the accessory, the side note, the second choice, but contracts don't care about egos. She gave a small smile, and he clearly never read this one carefully enough. She flipped to another section, pointing at a paragraph highlighted in yellow. These protective clauses prevent dilution of your shares without your explicit written consent, she explained. Even if the marriage is invalid, even if he disputes your involvement, he cannot legally push you out. So the separation agreement he drafted, my chest tightened. Meaningless without your signature, she said firmly. He planned to manipulate you into signing away control, but the law is not on his side. In fact, she tapped another page. His deception may strengthen your position if this becomes a legal dispute. I exhaled shakily. Somewhere between fear and anger, something like clarity began to crystallize. I wasn't just the betrayed woman in his shadow. I was the majority owner of the company he'd built his image on. I'm not just his second wife, I murmured. I'm the foundation of his business. Exactly, Aunt Denise said. And now that we know the full scope, we need to act before he tries anything reckless. She outlined the steps with crisp precision. We freeze any suspicious transactions immediately. I have contacts at the bank who can expedite that. I nodded, absorbing each word like instructions for survival. We schedule a meeting with a silent investor I know, someone who can stabilize the company while we transition control. She slid another document toward me. And then we plan a coordinated confrontation, a transparent one, with his partner present, his parents if necessary, and Allison. Lies thrive in private corners, they die in well-lit rooms. A chill ran through me, not fear this time, but anticipation. I closed the file slowly, my hands no longer shaking. When I walked into her office today, I felt like a woman crawling through the rubble of a ruined marriage. But as I walked out, file under my arm, boots clicking against the polished floor, I felt different. Taller somehow, straighter, like I'd stepped sideways into a new version of myself. Not the betrayed wife. Not the scared woman begging for scraps of honesty. The majority shareholder, the one holding the actual power, the one he built his world on without bothering to check whose name was on the foundation. And the next time Lucas tried to talk over me, smooth talk me, or shrink me down into something convenient, he was going to learn exactly who he'd been dismissing. Lucas lifted his glass like a man presenting a crown, the stem catching the warm light from the chandelier above the long, polished table. To 2 incredible years of Hale and Nova, he announced, voice smooth, confident, utterly certain he owned the room. Half the faces staring back at him already knew the truth. The other half were about to learn what kind of man was making this toast. The private dining room smelled of roasted garlic and expensive wine. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, white tablecloths, polished silver. His parents sat near him, his mother already misty-eyed, his father stiff and proud. Ethan, his business partner, scrolled on his phone until Lucas elbowed him. A few key clients murmured polite compliments. Some of the staff tried to look relaxed, but their eyes darted between me and Lucas like they could sense a storm coming. And across from them, sitting quietly with her hands folded in her lap, was Allison, coincidentally invited to discuss co-parenting logistics. Lucas had seated her near the end, as far from himself as possible without looking obvious. Max wasn't there, thankfully. No child needed to witness this. I sat near the center of the table. Aunt Denise sat beside me, calm, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. The folders containing everything, every document, every signature, every lie were tucked neatly under our chairs. Lucas raised his glass again. Family, he said, grinning wide. That's what makes all this possible. Trust, partnership, building something together. His gaze swept the room before landing on me. He softened his smile theatrically. And my wife, Nora, my biggest supporter, my rock, I wouldn't be here without her. It was such a gentle-looking smile, like a caress in front of witnesses. If you didn't know him, you'd think it was love, but I'd learned the difference between affection and performance. People clinked glasses, I didn't lift mine. He moved on, gesturing to the projector beside him. And now, he announced, some mock-ups of our new office space, big things coming this year. He clicked the remote and a slide lit up the wall behind him. That was my cue. I stood. Chairs shuffled, forks clinked against plates. Lucas glanced at me, surprised but jovial. Oh, babe, did you want to add something? Maybe a budget update? He laughed lightly. She loves her spreadsheets, you guys. I didn't smile. I have something to add, I said, my voice clear, steady, as the majority owner of Hale and Nova. The room stilled instantly. Ethan frowned, leaning forward. Lucas blinked like he misheard. His parents exchanged a confused glance. Honey, Lucas said slowly, chuckling, let's not exaggerate. Aunt Denise stood beside me and began distributing printed copies of the operating agreement, placing them in front of each person with deliberate calm. The paper made crisp, final sounds as it hit the table. Highlighted in yellow, she said, is Nora's 55% ownership and the protective clauses preventing any dilution without her written consent. Ethan's face drained of color. He scanned the paperwork like it was written in fire. Lucas, he whispered harshly, you told me. That's enough, Lucas snapped. But it wasn't enough. Not even close. I bent down, retrieved the manila envelope Lucas thought I'd never see, and placed it onto the table. The heavy paper landed with a soft thud that echoed louder than his toast. These, I said, sliding out the contents, are the documents I found in the locked drawer in our apartment. His mother leaned forward, his father stiffened. A client stopped mid-sip of his wine. I laid everything out. The marriage certificate. The lack of a divorce decree. The lace with Allison's name. The medical bills for Max. The photos of holidays, birthdays, family moments. And the draft separation agreement targeting me. Allison stood quietly, her voice soft but unwavering as she confirmed dates, text messages, support payments he failed to make, and the lies he fed her about me. Lucas's face flushed red, then pale, then red again. He jabbed a finger toward me. This is inappropriate, you're misinterpreting legal jargon. These are private matters. And Allison, how could you embarrass me like this? I'm not embarrassing you, she said. I'm correcting the record. He turned on me next. You're being vindictive, confused, you don't understand how business works or relationships. I ignored the insult. I understand perfectly, I said. I'm separating from you. The validity of our marriage will be determined legally. And as of tonight, I'm exercising my rights as majority shareholder to initiate a full review of Hale and Nova's finances and your role in the company. His parents looked stunned. Ethan stared at the papers as if he was watching his career crumble molecule by molecule. A client whispered something to his wife. Several staff members exchanged wide-eyed looks. Lucas opened his mouth to argue again, but for once the room wasn't his stage. He wasn't the center. He wasn't in control. And when I looked at him, really looked, I saw something startling. He was small. Not because I raised my voice or had power I never used before, but because for the first time, he realized I'd found the version of myself he'd counted on me never discovering. And he had no idea how to stop me now. By Monday morning, my phone wasn't a phone anymore. It was a battlefield. It vibrated on the coffee table until it slowly inched toward the edge, call after call, notification after notification. Lucas, unknown, Lucas again, then his mom, then Ethan, then numbers I didn't recognize. I sat on the couch in my pajamas, mug of coffee going cold in my hands, just watching it light up and buzz. Part of me still had that old reflex to grab it immediately, to answer, to fix, to explain, to defend myself. I didn't. The first voicemail came from Lucas. His voice was tight, controlled fury. What you did was disgusting, he said. You blindsided me in front of my parents, my clients. You've sabotaged the business because you can't control your emotions. Call me back so we can undo some of this damage before it's too late. The second voicemail was from his mom. That one was drunk and messy. How could you do that to my son? She slurred. You homewrecker, you knew about Allison, you used him for his business and then humiliated him. I hope you're happy. I listened once, then hit delete. My hands trembled anyway. An email pinged next, Ethan. Subject line, request to talk privately. His message was carefully worded. Every sentence sanded down until it said almost nothing directly. Nora, I'm hoping we can discuss a path forward that preserves the agency and minimizes reputational damage to all parties. I believe a private conversation would be more productive than public escalation. Please let me know your availability. I stared at the words reputational damage for a long time. Funny how the people who look the other way until the room catches fire suddenly care about smoke. I didn't answer any of them, not yet. By Tuesday, the second wave started. Mutual acquaintances, people I'd only ever grabbed drinks with after work or seen at Lucas's so-called networking events, slid into my DMs. Hey, I heard what happened. Did you really have to make it so public? Couldn't this have been handled privately between you two? Business stuff is messy. Are you sure going nuclear was the best idea? There it was, that familiar, suffocating pressure to be smaller, softer, more discreet, to prioritize his comfort over my reality. I opened a blank email draft and wrote the only statement I was willing to give. I won't be discussing this in detail. The legal facts are clear and documented. I wish everyone well. I attached a single redacted page, one line showing my 55% ownership, another showing the marriage records timeline, his existing marriage to Allison, the lack of divorce, the date he married me anyway. No commentary, no insults, no rage. Just facts. I sent it to the people who'd messaged, then set it as a template. If others asked, they got the same response. Some never wrote back, some went very quiet, like silence would save them from choosing sides. But not everyone drifted away. A few reached out differently. A former coworker texted, "I'm so sorry, I believe you." One of Lucas's cousins, who I'd always liked, sent, "We had our suspicions. Thank you for putting it all out there." Then an email popped up from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line, "Thank you. I'm a junior designer at Hale and Nova," it read. "I've seen the way Lucas talks to you in the office and the way he talks about you when you're not there. I always knew something was off but couldn't name it. Thank you for finally putting a name to it. Whatever happens with the agency, some of us are on your side." I read that one 3 times. It didn't erase the ugliness, but it pressed a small, warm patch over the bruise. Later that week, Ethan emailed again, less polished this time. "We need to meet," he wrote. "The agency is bleeding. Clients are nervous. We need to salvage what we can. This isn't just about Lucas anymore, it's about everyone who works here." I forwarded the email to Aunt Denise. Her reply was quick: "You should go, I'll be there. This is where we set the terms." The meeting itself was strangely quiet. A small glass-walled conference room at the agency, the smell of burnt coffee lingering. The walls were covered with framed mock-ups of campaigns and brand slogans about integrity and vision. I tried not to laugh. Ethan sat across from us, looking like he hadn't slept, disposable cup in his hands, foot tapping under the table. "I didn't know about the marriage situation," he said immediately. "I knew he was complicated romantically, but I didn't know that." He glanced at Denise, nervous. "But the business, can we keep it alive?" Aunt Denise spoke before I did, her tone cool, professional. "Any continued operations will be under Nora's oversight as majority owner. That includes full access to accounting, books, and past transactions. No more side deals. No more hidden drafts designed to erase her stake." Ethan nodded quickly. Of course, of course." "If that's not acceptable," she continued, "then we'll entertain a buyout, on Nora's terms." He swallowed. I think we'd prefer to keep things running." It felt surreal, sitting there in the same building where Lucas used to brag about his company, listening to his partner finally acknowledge my role not as an accessory, but as the person holding the real leverage. While we were there, my phone buzzed twice in my bag, insistent. When I checked it afterward, the screen was full of notifications from Lucas. One text: "We can still fix this if you stop now." The next: "You have no idea who you're messing with. I will ruin you if you keep pushing." Another voicemail, his voice thick, like he'd been drinking. "You're unstable, Nora, you need help. This crusade of yours is going to blow up in your face." It was the same script he'd used about Allison back when I didn't know better. She's emotional, she's difficult, she's not well. Only now I could see the pattern word for word. I didn't respond, not to the apologies, not to the threats, not to the emotional whiplash he was trying to drag me through. I muted his number, set a filter to send every message straight to a folder that auto-forwarded to Aunt Denise's email. Then I put my phone face down on the table, opened my laptop and pulled up spreadsheets, not for him this time but for me, for the business I now had to stabilize, for the legal steps that would protect Allison and Max as much as possible from the hurricane he'd built around himself. I wasn't going to win this by shouting louder in group chats or trading accusations and whispers. I was going to win it with silence, documents, and decisions he was no longer invited to control. The conference room felt colder than usual, even with the sun pushing weakly through the frosted glass. I sat at the long table, my table now technically, while an outside accountant in a crisp gray suit arranged his files with meticulous care. Papers slid against one another with a soft whisper. Pens clicked. A faint hum from tea. The old ceiling vent filled the silence. Across from me, Ethan dabbed sweat from his forehead with a napkin he'd stolen from the break room. Lucas sat beside him, arms crossed, jaw tight, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked smaller here than he had at the restaurant, like the walls were pressing in on him. The leather chair he always claimed as his spot seemed to swallow him whole. I folded my hands in my lap. "Let's begin." The accountant nodded and opened a binder. "Per the majority owner's request," he said, giving me a short, respectful glance, "we conducted a preliminary audit of Hale and Nova's financials. Our review includes expense reports, credit card statements, payroll, vendor invoices, and bank transfers for the past 18 months. Lucas scoffed under his breath. "Majority owner," he muttered, as if the phrase burned his tongue. I didn't react. The accountant continued. "We noticed a pattern of expenses categorized as client-related that appear inconsistent with actual business activity." He slid a page forward. Restaurant receipts, steakhouses, wine bars, even a Michelin star place neither Lucas nor I had ever visited together. Jewelry stores, men's grooming subscriptions, a charge from a boutique that sold children's toys. "These dinners weren't client meetings?" the accountant asked, eyes narrowing behind his glasses. "No," Ethan said immediately, too quickly. "At least, I don't think so. Lucas didn't loop me in on every." "Don't throw me under the bus," Lucas snapped. "You knew I was building relationships." "With who?" I asked softly. His eyes flicked toward me, then away. The accountant turned another page. "We also identified recurring payments, monthly, from the business account to a personal account under the name A. Grant Hale." Ethan shifted, Lucas stiffened. I kept my voice calm. "That's Allison, his first wife." The accountant nodded grimly. "The note field for these transfers labels them as office storage and equipment rental, which is inaccurate. According to our review, they match the rent amount for an apartment at," he read the address aloud. "Allison's apartment, the one where she'd opened the door, holding Max, eyes tired but honest." Lucas finally snapped his gaze up at me. "You don't understand the situation." The accountant ignored him. "Mislabeling personal expenses as business expenses constitutes a tax compliance issue. The IRS takes this very seriously. We recommend immediate corrective action." Ethan looked like he wanted to melt into the carpet. I only knew some of this," he said, voice trembling. "Lucas told me Nora was fine with it, that it was all family, so it wasn't I thought." "You thought wrong," Aunt Denise said sharply, her voice slicing through the air. She'd been silent until now, observing, taking notes, letting the numbers speak first. "This is breach of fiduciary duty, and possibly grounds for derivative claims." Lucas flinched at the legal terms, his bravado wavered, then cracked. "This is ridiculous," he said, slamming his palm on the table. "You're twisting everything to make me look like some kind of criminal. Nora, tell them you don't want to destroy me. Tell them you're not actually doing this." I finally let myself look him directly in the eyes. "I'm not destroying you, Lucas. You did that yourself. I'm just refusing to cover for you anymore." "You're ungrateful," he snapped. "Vindictive, you'd be nothing without me. I built this company, I built us." I let the accountant flip to the final summary before responding. "What you built," I said, slowly, deliberately, "was a business using my money, a marriage on top of a lie, and a financial system that kept your entire life hidden behind expenses I unknowingly paid for." Ethan's face fell further. The accountant closed the binder. "Our recommendation is clear. Mr. Hale should step down from any financial oversight role immediately. Continued involvement would compromise the audit and expose the company to further liability." Aunt Denise slid a written proposal across the table. Here is the structured exit plan, she said. If Lucas declines, we will file formal complaints and pursue action as needed. Lucas stared at the paper like it might explode. No, I'm not signing anything. You don't get to take my company. You don't get to. It's not your company, I said quietly, and you don't have to sign today, but you will, because the alternative is worse for you. His chest rose and fell, breaths quickening. Anger, panic, disbelief, all fighting for space on his face. But for me, the air felt different, clearer, like the storm was behind me instead of over me. When the meeting ended, Ethan lingered, shoulders slumped. Nora, I'll cooperate, whatever you need. Lucas didn't linger. He stormed out, knocking over a chair on his way. I stepped out of the conference room last, the hallway bright with fluorescent lights that buzzed softly overhead. For the first time, walking through Hale and Nova D. I didn't make me feel like a visitor in his world. This time, I felt the weight of something real under my feet. Not rage, not revenge. Power, quiet, grounded, documented power, backed by more than just my emotions. And I wasn't afraid of the next step. The hearing room felt like someone had drained all the warmth out of it. 4 beige walls, a humming fluorescent light, a long laminate table polished so many times it had gone dull. No charm, no softness, just sterility. A place built for truth stripped of emotion. Maybe that's why Lucas looked so uncomfortable. We all sat facing one another. Me with Aunt Denise at my right. Lucas with his lawyer, a man with a too-sharp tie and an expression that said he thought charm could replace facts. Allison on the opposite end, her attorney beside her, a neatly dressed woman with a calm, razor-sharp stare. And in the center, the mediator, gray suit, glasses, pen poised over a yellow legal pad. The air smelled faintly of old carpet and hand sanitizer. Let's begin, the mediator said, voice neutral, practiced. Lucas shifted in his chair, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from his shirt. He glanced at me briefly, annoyed, tired, cornered, before turning his attention to his lawyer. The lawyer cleared his throat. We'd like to start by establishing that the marriage between my client and Ms. Bennett Hale is potentially voidable, given the timeline issues. He paused, letting the euphemism hang in the air. Therefore, she should not expect spousal benefits or make claims based on marital rights. Voidable. I almost laughed, not because it wasn't true, legally it was complicated, but because of how gently he tried to wrap the word bigamy. He continued, furthermore, Ms. Bennett Hale's involvement in Hale and Nova has been minimal. Her contributions were supportive, yes, but not managerial. Any assertion of majority control is being exaggerated. Aunt Denise didn't even blink. She simply opened her binder, slid a copy of the operating agreement toward the mediator, and said, her ownership stake is not based on marriage. It is contractual, financial, documented. Her investment, made with her own funds, predates many of Mr. Hale's subsequent decisions. She has full standing to demand accountability. The mediator nodded, flipping through the pages. I see a 55% ownership interest here. Lucas's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Allison's attorney leaned forward next, her voice calm but firm. On our side, we're requesting updated child support terms, supervised through wage garnishment. Mr. Hale has repeatedly failed to make consistent payments. Additionally, evidence shows he misrepresented his living situation and used company funds for personal expenses, including support for a family he hid from both women. Lucas stiffened. That's an exaggeration. It's documented, she replied. The mediator looked at Lucas. Mr. Hale, can you clarify why business funds were used for rent payments on an apartment not affiliated with the agency? Lucas opened his mouth, then closed it again. It was temporary, a loan arrangement. I meant to correct the entries, but. And the ongoing charges labeled as client entertainment that involved jewelry and non-business dining, the mediator pressed. It was networking, he snapped. You don't understand how creative industries work. The mediator scribbled a note, then explained the medical bills for a dependent that were submitted for reimbursement. Lucas swallowed, trapped. I was under stress, things got complicated, I didn't have time to. Which things? The mediator asked mildly. The marriage you never dissolved, the second marriage you entered, the child support, the business expenses, be specific. Lucas shot me a look, a silent help me or maybe stop this, but I stayed still. He tried again, stumbling over his words. I wasn't trying to deceive anyone. I was just juggling too much, and Nora, she took things out of context. Aunt Denise folded her hands neatly. The documents are the context. By the time the mediator finished his questions, Lucas had contradicted himself 3 times. His lawyer kept adjusting his tie like he wished it were a noose. Allison stared at the table, jaw tight, her attorney tapping a pen calmly. Finally, the mediator leaned back. Given all the information, he said, here is the proposed framework. Everyone straightened. Nora retains control of Hale and Nova, unless she elects a substantial buyout. Allison will receive updated, enforceable child support terms with arrears and payments monitored. Lucas will step back from all financial decision-making and agree to a repayment plan for misused company funds. Lucas's mouth fell open. "You're stripping me of everything." "No," the mediator said. "We are clarifying roles based on evidence." Lucas's glare swung toward me, fiery, accusing, desperate, like I had stolen something that belonged to him, like I was the reason his world was collapsing. But as I gathered my papers and stood to leave, all I felt was a strange, steady calm. I hadn't taken anything. I'd simply stopped allowing him to take from me, and from Allison, and from Max. Today I know that some people only run out of excuses when the truth finally has a seat at the table. The first time I saw Lucas's face on a local business blog, I was sitting at my new desk, sipping lukewarm coffee and reviewing a campaign budget. A notification popped up on my screen. I clicked it without thinking, then froze. His photo stared back at me, the same headshot he used for every pitch deck. Confident smile, neatly trimmed beard, arms crossed like he was about to save the creative world. But the headline under it wasn't the one he used to fantasize about. It was, "Creative Visionary Elevates Local Branding Scene." It was, "Former agency founder accused of misusing funds." My stomach didn't drop, it didn't clench, it didn't even flutter, it simply settled, like it had been holding something heavy for months and finally put it down. By then, months had already passed since the hearing. Hale and Nova, now Bennett and Co. Creative, looked different. Leaner team, tighter processes, honest books. A culture built on clarity instead of charisma. We'd repainted, reorganized, rewired workflows. Every day that passed, the place felt less like the stage Lucas used to perform on and more like a real company run by adults. Even the air felt cleaner. I'd rebranded quietly, carefully. Not a dramatic announcement, just a shift in tone, in colors, in leadership messaging. A gradual erasing of fingerprints without erasing the work of the people who had stayed. They deserved better than to be defined by his chaos. The article didn't surprise me. It only confirmed what we'd uncovered during the audit. But seeing it all laid out by a stranger, public, factual, undeniable, felt surreal. Halfway through reading, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize, a journalist. They attached public records to their email. A complaint by a disgruntled client who'd been charged for market research trips that were actually weekend getaways. A contractor who'd never been paid, citing Lucas's excuses about temporary cash flow issues. A vendor who'd filed a small claims case for unpaid invoices. The journalist wrote, "Given your role as majority owner and your cooperation with the audit, we'd like to confirm details for accuracy." The article didn't paint me as vindictive, it didn't sensationalize the marriage mess, it simply stated the truth. Internal restructuring is underway. Majority owner initiated third-party audit. Lucas Hale is no longer involved in financial or operational leadership. Just the facts, the same thing he always thought could protect him, facts, were now the thing undoing him. Over the next week, the digital world responded. People who used to toast glasses with him at networking mixers quietly unfollowed him. A few left vague posts about accountability in business leadership, never naming him but leaving little doubt about who they meant. Some of our mutual acquaintances, who once asked me if I'd overreacted at the restaurant, watched from a distance now, suddenly shy about their opinions. The silence around him grew loud. And then Allison texted me. He tried to get the court to lower his support payments again. Judge didn't buy it. Garnishment is in place. He can't wiggle out now. I stared at her message for a long moment, feeling a complicated mix of relief, sadness, and something like justice, not revenge, not triumph, just balance. A week later, I found myself sitting in the back row of a licensing board hearing. One of Lucas's little side ventures, the consulting service he ran under the table, was under review. The room smelled of stale coffee and photocopier toner, the kind of place where nothing glamorous ever happened. Lucas sat at the front, shoulders tense, fingers tapping anxiously on the table. His hair was longer, unkempt. He looked like someone whose sleep had been fractured for months. The board members took turns reading from documents, reports, complaints, inconsistencies. They talked about misused funds, misleading claims, failure to disclose conflicts of interest. They didn't know me, didn't know Allison, didn't know the drawer or the lies or the nights I cried quietly into my pillow to keep the neighbors from hearing. They didn't know the version of Lucas who whispered charm into my insecurities. They only knew the numbers, the paperwork, the red flags. Vags. He looked back once, eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. His expression flickered, anger, then pleading, then something like accusation. as if I could save him with a single sentence, as if I owed him absolution. I didn't look away. I just didn't move. The board issued sanctions, immediate, severe enough to collapse his consulting gig entirely. When he stood, shoulders tight and jaw locked, he didn't look like the man who had given speeches about building an empire. He looked like someone realizing his empire had always been built on sand. I walked out of the building slowly, the doors clicking shut behind me. The air outside was crisp, almost sweet, like the city had rinsed itself clean after a storm. A heaviness settled over me, not dark, not painful, bittersweet. I hadn't orchestrated his fall. I hadn't whispered lies or staged traps or manipulated anyone. All I'd done was open a drawer, tell the truth, and refuse to shield him anymore. The rest happened on its own. Today I know that sometimes karma doesn't arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, through forms, audits, hearings, and the simple unraveling of who someone really is when the world finally stops believing the version they pretend to be. The first time I unlocked the office with my name etched into the frosted glass, my hand trembled the exact same way it had when I held the key to Lucas's forbidden drawer. But the feeling wasn't fear this time. It was disbelief, warm, disorienting disbelief that this space, this quiet corner office with morning light pooling across the carpet, now belonged to me. The door gave a soft click as it opened. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and jasmine from the little diffuser Allison insisted on gifting me. The hum of the building's HVAC blended with the muffled chatter of the team outside, voices I actually trusted, people who actually respected me. Bennett and Co. Creative. My name's my company. A merge of my mother's legacy and my own spine, rebuilt piece by piece. The rebrand wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't need to be. Lucas had always craved theatrics, but I'd wanted something quieter, something honest. The team was smaller now, trimmed down to the ones who cared about the work more than the illusion of genius. And Allison, she shocked me the most. Watching her settle into the operations role was like watching someone finally step into the light after years of living on dimmer switches. Her practicality grounded us, her soft-spoken clarity becoming the backbone of our new workflow. I still wasn't used to seeing her here. The first morning she walked into the office holding a coffee for me, 2 pumps vanilla right, my throat tightened. Not because of awkwardness or the shadow of what we'd both endured, but because healing wasn't supposed to look this functional, this collaborative, this human, and yet here we were. Meetings were different now. We sat around the long walnut table that used to be Lucas's stage, where he'd perform inspiration and belittle questions he didn't want to answer. Those meetings had always felt like balancing on a pin. Now they felt like sitting at a kitchen table with adults, hashing out timelines and budgets without anyone's voice being distorted or drowned. When someone spoke, we listened. When someone disagreed, we discussed. And when someone had an idea, we wrote it on the whiteboard, even if it wasn't brilliant or market shifting. It was enough that it was real. Tasha joined us 2 months in, leaving our old firm with a dramatic speech about finally choosing environments that don't eat your soul. The day she walked in, carrying a potted snake plant like it was a baby, I felt something inside me unclench. She took over the finance systems with the precision of a surgeon and the attitude of someone who'd been waiting years to be appreciated. Sometimes, when a client complimented how organized our proposals were, we'd exchange this private, exhausted, hilarious look. Like, remember when we weren't allowed to speak in meetings? Look at us now. My condo remained my sanctuary. The quiet there felt different than before, less like a place I hid in, more like a place I chose. The walls no longer echoed with confusion or fear. They held my breathing, my choices, my peace. But the office was becoming a second home. Plants along the windowsill, a whiteboard cluttered with scribbles that looked like chaos but were actually plans, and a locked drawer in my desk that held only properly signed contracts and carefully labeled backup drives. Nothing mysterious, nothing meant to trap or trick anyone. A drawer with nothing to hide. That alone felt like a revolution. Every few weeks, word about Lucas floated to me through someone in the industry. His name drifting like smoke, always the same pattern. He'd pitched another freelance project. Another client had backed out. He'd been overheard in a cafe complaining about women who used him, adjusting the story depending on who he thought might sympathize. But sympathy wasn't coming as easily anymore. People were tired, people remembered facts, and the charisma he used as currency was finally running out of value. Fewer ears, fewer open doors, fewer enablers. Sometimes I wondered if he genuinely believed his own stories or if he just didn't know how to live without them, but I never wondered for long. It wasn't my job to diagnose him, not anymore. One evening, after everyone else had gone home, I stood in the dim glow of my office, turning off the last lamp. The space fell into a soft twilight, shadows stretching across the floor. As I reached to close the door, I caught my reflection in the glass. Bennett and Co. Creative. My name right beside my face. I stared for a long moment, not recognizing myself at first, and then recognizing myself more clearly than I had in years. I didn't look like the woman who once stood frozen in her own hallway, told not to open a drawer in her own home. I didn't look like the woman who apologized for asking questions or second-guessed her instincts because someone smirked or sighed. I looked like the woman who did open the drawer, who faced what she found, who didn't break even when the truth tried to shatter her. Today I know I didn't just survive him. I rebuilt a life he never had the power to imagine, let alone destroy. Now when I hear a drawer slide open in my home, I don't flinch. The soft wooden scrape used to feel like a warning, like the start of a fight I hadn't prepared for. But now it's just me moving through my own space, organizing receipts or tucking away chargers, with no one hovering behind me, no breath on my neck, no hand snatching something out of my reach. Just the simple quiet of knowing everything in this home belongs to me, and everything in the drawers is something I chose to keep. I sat at my kitchen table one evening, a cup of tea warming my palms, steam fogging the edge of my glasses. Outside, the late city sounds drifted up through the cracked window, distant horns, a neighbor's dog barking, the faint hum of someone's music. The apartment lighting was low and gentle, nothing like the too bright, too sharp overheads Lucas always insisted on. The softness made it easier to breathe. And then, without warning, a memory washed over me, the exact pressure of Lucas's fingers digging into my wrist the first time I reached for that drawer. How his voice dropped into that faux gentle whisper, "Don't open that drawer, Nora." How he smiled like he was teasing, but his eyes were pure panic. Back then I thought he was trying to protect me from something difficult or painful. Today I know he was only protecting himself from the one thing he couldn't manipulate, the truth finally having somewhere solid to land. I took a slow sip of tea, the taste of chamomile grounding me, and thought about the version of me who once lived in the same city in a different apartment under the weight of someone else's rules. The version who believed being a good wife meant staying quiet, smoothing conflicts, not asking too many questions, who shrank an inch every time someone called her dramatic or paranoid or too into the details. That woman tried so hard to be agreeable that she disappeared inside the shadows of a man who only loved admiration, not partnership. And yet, that same woman eventually opened the drawer anyway. With shaking hands, with a stomach full of dread, with the kind of courage that doesn't feel like courage at all, it feels like survival. She opened it and found out her marriage might not even be real on paper. She opened it and found proof of a child she'd never been told existed. She opened it and found paperwork meant to erase her from the company she had quietly funded, quietly built, quietly held together. She found the truth, and instead of destroying her, it revealed what had been hers all along. My power didn't come from screaming or threatening or trying to beat Lucas at his own game. My power came from paper, from documentation, from the choices I had made long before I understood their weight, from the shares Aunt Denise protected for me, from the calm, precise way I refused to be intimidated. Lucas lost clients. He lost credibility. He lost the role he loved playing, the charming creative genius everyone should admire. But my revenge was never his suffering. I didn't want him ruined. I didn't want him punished. What I wanted, what I fought for, was a life where he no longer got to define me. A life where my money, my home, my agency, my voice weren't run through the filter of his ego. My revenge was keeping my condo. My revenge was keeping my company. My revenge was keeping my sanity when he tried so hard to fracture it. My revenge was learning that I never needed to be allowed to open anything. Not a drawer, not a conversation, not a future. A soft breeze drifted in through the open window, fluttering the corner of a stack of invoices on my table. I closed my laptop, felt the gentle click of the hinge, and switched off the light. The room fell into a warm darkness, broken only by the street glow passing through the blinds. For a moment, I just stood there listening. No footsteps. No whispered accusations. No locks clicking in the middle of the night. Just my own thoughts, quiet and steady. And they no longer said, "Don't open that drawer." They said, "If something scares you, that open it, look at it, and then decide what you want to do with the truth."